All right, so welcome back. Now we start section 3 of part 1 of the Industrial Revolution. All right, section 3 of part 1 of the Industrial Revolution. Now we're going to start off with a little bit of a graph here. And if we take a look at it, we have some real startling information here. So we take a look down here, 1700s. Production of both iron and cotton is low, but it's at least steady. All right, 2 million pounds of cotton, and that goes on for the better part of the century. Then around 1765, 1775, things start to pick up. Okay, pick up pace. That's about the time that the Industrial Revolution really starts to kick into gear in England. Boom! Look at this rise. Now all of a sudden we hit the 8 million pound mark in cotton. And we're at the 6 and 8 and 9 million pound mark for iron. And then from there it just skyrockets. Okay, skyrockets. We have millions of pounds in the double digits. Okay, now we're getting into the triple digits and thousands of tons. Okay, so that by the time the year 1800 rolls around, holy smokes, production is off the charts. That's Industrial Revolution. That's your machines adding to production, adding to efficiency. Now, the second part of the Industrial Revolution we get to next week will have to do with pollution. Along with the machines and along with all the burning of that coal came lots of pollution. So here's just kind of like a preview of what the skyline of England would start to look like. Okay, another video within the video. At the end, I'll go over the important stuff that I want you to get out of it.
In the 1760s, two new machines, the spinning jenny and the water frame, caused a revolution in the textile industry because both machines markedly sped up the process of making thread for weaving. These machines were adapted to use the power of flowing water, or hydraulic power. This means that the motion of the water would turn a wheel that was connected by a complicated system of pulleys and belts used to run the machines. Another machine, called the spinning mule, was developed later in the 1700s. When it was hooked up to water power, just one person could do the work of 3,000 hand spinners. The new textile machines were extremely efficient at producing the fine thread needed to make high-quality cloth, and they caused the cottage spinning industry to collapse soon after they were introduced. A little later, mechanized power looms were developed that used water power instead of human muscle power to weave thread into cloth. One important invention adapted to power weaving from hand looms was a mechanized version of the flying shuttle seen here. This was a special device used to rapidly weave across thread through the webs of thread on the loom. On power looms, this process took place at an incredible speed when compared to doing it by hand. It is not surprising that the much more efficient power looms rapidly ended the cottage weaving industry. In England in 1811, unemployed home textile workers, called the Luddites, got so angry about losing their jobs that they rioted and tried to destroy the new textile machines.
All right, so when you guys go back through this short video, a couple things I want you to pay attention to. What was a cottage industry? Okay, cottage industry was people at home making clothes. That was your cottage textile industry. People at home making clothes. Then came the machines. All right, they could make the clothes faster. So as you go back through this short video, this is a question that you can both use on your left-hand margin, but I also want you to take down the information in your notes. Why did the Luddites riot? Okay, why did the Luddites riot? And the machines themselves is a clue, but why did the Luddites riot? All right, moving on. Transportation improvements. Transportation improvements, meaning improving how people got around. First and most important one, steam engine. All right, the steam engine completely changed everything. Definite emphasis there. Guaranteed to be on the test. The steam engine changed everything. It used water for power, but the way it did it, because you couldn't have a river everywhere. So what it did is it used the coal, burned it, heated up the water. The steam from the water would be captured in pipes or turbines. Those would turn, and it would power whatever the steam engine was attached to. An engine, or another type of engine like the locomotive engines. Machines to weave cloths, or clothing, excuse me. Machines to make tools, whatever it was. Steam engines were almost universally used to power all kinds of machines. Coal was everywhere. You could dig it out of the ground pretty much everywhere in England. It was cheap. Water, of course, was free. All you had to do was carry it from point A to point B. You got the coal, you've got a fire, you've got water. You hook that up to the engine part of your steam engine. Now you have a cheap, long-term source of power. Some of the first kinds of transportation to use steam engines, steamboats. Steam engines helped power the boats so that you no longer needed paddles. The engines of the boats could transport the boat even upriver. So before, you'd have to walk upriver or transport your goods upriver and then transport new goods back downriver. Now you could go both ways because of the steamboat. So it sped things up, made commerce, in other words, the buying and selling of things, made it faster and easier. Now, the natural rivers sometimes weren't enough. Businesses needed more waterways so that they could transport more goods. So, what did people do? They started to dig huge ditches into the ground, filled them with water, and all of a sudden you have canals. Canals that were often big enough that they could fit multiple boats, and therefore you had a man-made river. Along with the steamboats, now you could transport even more goods and more raw materials back and forth from along different places. People built better roads. Okay, better roads with better drainage for when it rained meant that these roads didn't get all muddied up. Carts and wagons didn't get stuck in the mud, and so it improved transportation. It made it faster, made it easier. Getting raw materials to factories, getting manufactured finished goods out to market. And then the whole thing starts over again. Okay, quick picture of England, the island. And really this is just for one thing. Notice all those squiggly blue lines. Those are your rivers. This red line is just a border line. Now you have better roads. You have steamboats. And eventually we get railroads. But the better roads means that you can get from point A to point B faster with wagons and carts and by horseback. And all of these rivers, whether they be natural rivers or man-made canals, meant that you could get raw materials to factories and finished goods out to market from just about anywhere on the island. So these improvements in transportation made a huge difference in making sure that England stayed at the top of getting things manufactured in factories and out to markets to sell. All right, the aforementioned railroads. This was another machine that was powered by a steam engine. And what railroads were good for? Hauling things. All right? You had you had locomotives, which is basically the train engine. The locomotive would be hooked up to a bunch of transport cars, and these transport cars would hold raw materials, finished goods. Eventually, they would hold people. And so railroads became hugely important in spreading industrialization to all parts of England. Because wherever the railroads went, you can be sure that factories would follow, people would follow, jobs would follow, and especially manufactured goods. Get them out to market, get them sold, so that you can start the whole thing over again. Now, the early trains, they weren't all that fast, 24 miles an hour. But back then, that was fast. And it was sure a lot faster than on foot. And you could only carry so much on horseback. And so with these railroads being able to haul huge amounts of freight and huge amounts of goods, the utility there is very obvious. Railroads meant getting goods, getting raw materials from point A to point B faster so that you could get them out to market, make that money. All right, as we wind down our third and final section of part one, let's talk about a few impacts of the revolutions here. Okay, we already know that the agricultural revolution led directly to the industrial revolution. Why? Why does industrial revolution, why does industrial revolution even care about agricultural revolution? Because the agricultural revolution made for better food. Better food meant healthier and more people. Those people turned into factory workers. Okay, definitely a point of emphasis, guaranteed to be on the test. Okay, agricultural revolution provided more and better food. The more and better food powered more and healthier people. Those more and healthier people would eventually turn into the workers that the factories would need to make goods. Railroads. Railroads spurred industrial growth. How? By transporting lots and lots of raw materials and goods all over the place so that the raw materials could be turned into manufactured goods. The manufactured goods could get out to market. Coal was cheap. You would fire the coal in the engine of the locomotive. The steam engine inside the locomotive would make the car go, and all of a sudden you have improved transportation. Factories started to sprout all over the place. This meant hundreds of thousands of jobs needed to be filled. You have a population boom out in the countryside. Well, there's only so much work and so much farm work that the countryside can provide, which meant that more people, not as many jobs out in the countryside, they needed to go somewhere for work. Where did they go? They went to the factories in the cities. So all these people left the countryside, went to the factories to go find work. And another impact of the Industrial Revolution is that overall it made travel easier. The railroads, the steamboats, at first they were made for hauling goods, raw materials and manufactured goods. But very quickly they also started to transport people. That's how people got from the countryside to the cities. And that's how people even transported themselves around the cities, is by these improved methods of transportation. And then lastly, we will leave it on kind of like a preview of what part two of the Industrial Revolution will be about: urbanization and pollution. Urbanization, definitely point of emphasis, guaranteed to be on the test. Urbanization was the mass movement of people to cities. All right, urbanization must have people. All right, it's the mass movement of people to cities. People from the farms and the countryside to the cities. That's your urbanization. And then this happened very fast. And what I mean by very fast is that over the course of less than a century, you had cities that were relatively small and unoccupied were now brimming over with people. So it was a very rapid, but also a very unsettling change to life. With all these people, with all the factories and everything, came a lot of pollution. Pollution from the factories and pollution from the homes. Pollution from the factories was in the form of waste that was dumped into rivers, smoke that came out of the smokestacks from the factory chimneys. Pollution that came from the home was in the form mostly of human waste. Okay, lots of pee, lots of poop. Most of that went into the rivers. Pretty gross. That was pollution. And then overpopulation. Now that this is kind of the dark side of that agricultural revolution. More and better food meant more and better people, but with all those increased people, you have increased pollution and overpopulation. Okay, here's another artist's rendering of what a British skyline might have looked like. Now this is a tad exaggerated, but it gets the point across. Lots of smokestacks, lots of smoke in the air. The air could get pretty thick with smoke smell, and sometimes it could get hard to breathe. So definitely an unfortunate dark side of industrialization is the pollution. And then lastly, just an image. This is definitely London. Okay, this is London, and it looks like fog. Well, part of it is fog, but this is like your beginnings of smog, folks. All right, so that orangish brown haze that hangs over Los Angeles and most of Southern California, well, it really got its start out there in London. All right, we are not going to do the writing prompt, so that ends that ends section 3 of this part 1 of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, all three parts of, all three sections of this part 1 of the lecture, they are all part 1. All right, we will go over part 2 next week. So don't forget to review your notes, guys. Formulate your questions, and then come up with your summaries. All right, work on that stuff sooner rather than later. That way you're not having to cram a bunch of stuff at the end. Plus, it makes for a better study tool out of your notes. All right, guys, take care. It was a blast as usual. We'll catch you in class.